Hi, Scott Orlin with Cinema-Magazine. All you documentary and music fans, you are in for a treat because we have a great juxtaposition of the two. It is the documentary on the Bee Gees, and I'm here with the person who put it all together, the incredibly talented Frank Marshall. Frank, I want to take you back to your own musical upbringing. How did the Bee Gees intersect with your own involvement of musical knowledge?
Well, Scott, I grew up in a musical family. My dad was a composer, arranger, producer for Capitol Records. He played jazz guitar. So I kind of grew up with a guitar in my hands. You see a couple in the back there. They're always not too far away. And I'm the oldest of three brothers. And back in the 60s, I actually had a little band with my brothers, 60s and 70s. So I kind of identified with all the elements that the Bee Gees had. And so I was fascinated, and I love their music. So I was fascinated to dive in and try and, bring their story to the audience.
What's interesting is in some of my research that this all kind of began at Capitol Records, that you had gone there for something else, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold.
Well, that's true. I had gone to meet Steve Barnett, who at that moment was the CEO of Capitol Records. Just as I'm doing some things with the UMG, which is Universal Music Group, and they had asked if I go meet Steve because all of the record labels and music groups are looking to reinvigorate their catalogs, and so. Plus, it was kind of a nostalgic visit for me to Capitol Records there on Vine Street in Hollywood. And the great thing was I discovered that Steve had just done an extensive remodel of the building. So it was all beautiful, and he restored a lot of the things that were there. And I actually remember when I was a kid driving down the Hollywood freeway. This had to be in the 50s when it was built. And my dad saying, see over there, that's where I'm going to work. And what do you think that looks like? And it was that you've seen the Capitol Record building. And I said, I don't know. And he said, it's a stack of 45 records. That's what it was representing. So there I was on the top of the stack of 45s talking to the new CEO of Capitol Records. And it was very nostalgic for me. And we just talked about maybe doing a documentary about Capitol Records or different artists. And they had just started one on Motown. And then he just mentioned that they had bought the catalog for the Bee Gees. And I said, well, I love the Bee Gees music. What about them? And that's kind of the rest is history.
Sadly, though, as you start to get involved in this process, only one of the brothers is still around, and that's Barry. So as you start to unfold and record this stuff, how candid was his viewpoint? Because you're relying on now just his memory.
He was very, very candid, and he was very generous and humble with his time. But he wanted to make sure that we knew this was just his memories, and that he made a big point of making sure that I would represent his brothers as well and what they thought about things. And as I started to look into the archives, I discovered this fantastic interview that was done with all three of them in 1999 by David Leaf. And so I had, all of the answers to the questions I was putting to Barry, I had from Morris and Robin as well. So I was able to represent the thinking, at least back then, of the three brothers.
Talk about your own treasure hunt of trying to find archival gems that we hadn't seen before, representing the various aspects of the Bee Gees' career.
Well, that is the thing I love about doing docs, unlike my day job, where everything is laid out minute by minute of what we're going to shoot with a script and a schedule and everything. With a doc, it's just kind of, you go this way, you go that way. It's kind of like a treasure hunt. And you find little bits and pieces and they send you this way, or you go this way, or it's a dead end. But in this case, there were just so many great things to be discovered. And I had this fantastic team at White Horse Pictures, and my two producers Jeannie Festa and Nigel Sinclair had this great team that would just, explore the internet and comb it for anything, pictures, video. We also put out sort of a link that if you were a Bee Gees fan and you had any 8mm film under your bed, send it, that kind of thing. And it turns out that one of the big treasure troves was in Miami with Morris's wife, and she had a lot of home movies of them in the Miami days, and that had never seen before, and that proved to be really, really valuable to us.
If you were to put them like on a 180-degree spectrum, you kind of start out, they're undiscovered, then they become underappreciated, then they find success, then they fall out of favor, then they become a worldwide phenomenon, and then they become a pariah, and then they kind of get reappreciated again. Why is that? Just typical of a lineage for any major group, or was there something unique about the work they represented?
No, I think it was really the brotherhood. I think the fact that they were brothers kept bringing them back together. They broke up several times too in those ups and downs. But, it's interesting when you talk to Barry, he says in the film, when we were growing up in Brisbane, Australia, we had this dream and we just knew we were going to do it. And it's something about that positive attitude and the fact that they were brothers. And even when they split up, they'd have to come back together for Christmas dinner. And they'd say, it was great when we were together. But I really think it was the brotherhood and their perseverance. I mean, they just kept going forward. They didn't let anything defeat them. They just kept adapting to the different times and the different decades and overcoming those obstacles that were in their way. So it was really that family, I think, unit and that brotherhood that kept them going.
What really was enlightening for me watching this documentary was, obviously, I remember the Saturday Night Fever explosion and how incredible successful they were, and even the follow-up of Spirits Having Flown. But then the backlash hit, and they kind of had to pull back because they were overexposed or whatever it was at that point. And they kind of pivoted and started writing for everybody else. So they were kind of off screen, but influencing everything on screen.
Yeah, that's true. It's exactly what happened. They were completely surprised and confused by what happened because they were kind of on the front wave of global pop stardom, whereas groups before had been successful in Europe or in the States. Nobody had really been out there until the Beatles on that, global scene. And they kind of got swept up with that. And they were very successful that with the Spirits Having Flown tour, they were on the top of the world. But then the backlash hit and they didn't understand. These are their fans who just, they sold 2 billion albums or something. And now they don't like them. But, I think that it's very, it's a perception that happens that we now know when groups and superstars get to the top, they get knocked off very easily because, it's then cool to say, oh, I don't like them, they were confused, they were hurt. They loved writing music and performing music, and they gave up one of them, the performance side. But when Barbra Streisand called Barry and said, hey, I'd like you to come do an album with me, Barry reached out to his brothers, Morris and Robin, and said, let's go write some tunes. And that was the start of a new comeback.
When you had your interactions with Barry, was there any kind of feedback of what he felt their biggest achievement was and what their biggest regret might have been?
Well, I think their biggest achievement was really their staying together and there being something that was able to be continued for so long. and their musical gifts and the things that they were doing so often were, you know, in the sort of collective unconscious of the world. And, you know, they stayed around for 5 decades. And I think that's what Barry's most proud of, is that they, you know, there was a lot of creativity and brotherhood and joy, and there was a lot of, you know, some tragedy and sadness too. And I think obviously the thing he regrets the most is that his brothers aren't here to still be performing and you know, being part of that scene.
Is there another musical docs brewing around in your head?
Oh, I got a couple. Yeah, one that's in the works right now is the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Jazz Fest, the Jazz and Cultural Music Festival in New Orleans. And that was last year, and we were lucky enough to be there to capture that. It was canceled actually, we were there in 2019.
Oh no, you froze.
In 2019, and there's some great performances, and I'm really anxious to get that one out there.
Okay, for those of you watching, Frank Marshall is not just an incredible documentarian. He actually, as he says, his full-time job is making movies. And one of the big ones that you were right in the middle of making, and then that COVID kind of came into the mix. How creatively interesting was it navigating Jurassic Dominion?
Wow. Well, there's another one where, you know, what is that saying? Adversity is the mother of invention. Well, we had to adapt on Jurassic World. We were in the middle of production. We shot for 3 weeks in Canada, and we were shut down by COVID. And so everybody went on hold. We moved back to London, where the stages were. We were at Pinewood, and we just shut down and waited. And, you know, it was kind of interesting because we had some visual effects work that we could continue to do with ILM, and Colin continued to sort of edit those sequences. But as we got closer and closer to seeing how things might start back up, our team jumped in, and we created we were the first big movie to start back up in July. And we had, again, we had a great team that, you know, started from scratch. Nobody had ever done this before, and created the sort of protocol and the plan of action to be able to shoot it safely. And we still had 90 days to go. And we made it almost all the way without having to shut down. But we did have somebody we had these different circles. And if you got too close to the inner circle, we'd have to take a break. And that only happened once near the end, but we finished successfully in November. The film is in the can. Colin's in the cutting room. ILM's making dinosaurs. And we will be out summer of 2022.
And before I let you leave, there's one other movie. Let's see, what was that? What would that movie be that you might be starting to put? Oh, it's an Indiana Jones film. Why? I mean, here it is going to be episode 5. I don't think when you did the first one that you ever envisioned that it would have this long of a life. Why do you think audiences want to keep coming back and having new adventures with him?
Well, they love Indiana Jones. They love that he's a down-to-earth kind of normal character who makes mistakes. He doesn't have gadgets. He's just a regular guy. And he goes on these adventures. And I think that the audience feels like they're going on the adventure with him. And he's a very charismatic character. And as I've said before, Harrison Ford will be back as Indiana Jones. And we're going to go on some new adventures.
Well, thank you for taking us on this adventure. As always, Frank Marshall, really appreciate it. The documentary is The Bee Gees. You're in for a treat. And this is Scott. Till next time.
Thank you, Scott. Great to